that, but we do appreciate you joining us. So thank you. And I'll let you take it from there.
Excellent. Thank you, Bernie. So I'm Paul Isely, and I guess I'll give you a quick background. I have a PhD in economics. I got it from Purdue University. I have undergraduate degrees in both physics and economics from the University of Wisconsin. And I've been at Grand Valley now for 25 years. They gave me a big medal that tells me that. Otherwise, I might not know. And over that time, I've delved deep into understanding the West Michigan economy and what makes it tick. So as a result, I spend a lot of time talking on TV or to radio or to print to give them an idea where we're heading. And I do 35 of these types of talks every year. So it's something that we do to try and help the community and make sure that West Michigan continues to move forward. So I'm going to start sharing a screen, and hopefully you see it. Let's see. Oop. There we go. So does everybody see my screen that says Michigan economy? All right, I got a thumbs up. Thank you, Rick. All right, so because I only see 4 people. All right, so Michigan economy. I'm going to do a quick recap of the last year, because we have to really help you understand what's driving things and what economists can tell you and what they can't tell you right now. So on TV, they tell you everything. But in reality, there's some things that we're going to be pretty good about right now and some things we're not going to be so good at. And we have to help you differentiate those. Okay, so I'm going to state the obvious to start with. Come on, there we go. The economy fell into a deep hole at an unprecedented speed in March 2020. This is important. It's important to say, and important to say it over and over again. We have no historical platform for where we are right now. All right. So we are in virgin territory as far as economic knowledge as to how the economy comes back and the ways it occurs. You need to understand that. So as I tell you things, we'll talk about what we know well, what we don't know well, and what things to look for, what marking posts to look for to know if we're heading in the direction that I think we're going to. Okay. So the first thing you have to understand is it's a virus and a public health response, not a broken economy. All right. We do not have a broken economy. This is not 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11. This isn't even 1982, 3, 4. This is a public health response. And that public health response varied by what state you were in. All right. So by the end of March last year, we had stay-at-home orders in almost every state, but the definition of a stay-at-home order was very different depending on where you lived. And here in Michigan, a recent Federal Reserve study showed that we had, from an economic point of view, the harshest shutdown in the United States. So we shut down harder than any other location. I'm not here to talk about whether that was the right thing or the wrong thing. It certainly was a response to what we saw happening in Detroit. I'm just here to say that's the way it was, and this is what it's doing. Okay, so here you can see the orange and the blue. The blue is Michigan, red off the left axis. Orange is the United States, red off the right axis. And what you can see here is that very high peak that Michigan had last April, which caused that harsh shutdown and caused that shutdown that lasted for the year at a pretty hard clip. Okay, then you see the beautiful summer, and you all probably were busy last summer. And anybody who was vaguely up north was even busier than those of us here. All right. And here you see what and this second little bump, which a lot of the press calls the second wave, it isn't a second wave. It's just the first wave. The wave of COVID moved through the economy, through the United States. So let me help you here. Here at the beginning, we were in March. It was cold in Michigan. People were inside. Transmission was heavy. Then as we went into spring, people went outside, and being outside, it resulted in less transmission. And then Around July and August, it got really hot in the South and they went inside. And then we started to see transmission there. So the press made this a red-blue story about politics. It really was about the weather. When it got so hot that you had to be inside, things took off. And then here you see Michigan took off first because it got colder here sooner than it got colder other places. So if we do this as a correlation on temperature, it is amazing how accurate you can actually model this. But to show you the difference here, this is the United States. So here you can see it spent all year below their January 2020 readings for employment. And in April, with all the shutdowns, you can see service providing went down by about 15%. And then we came back and we've been down about 5 to 10% the rest of the year, right? Remember this 15%. Here's Michigan, 33%. Okay, that's the difference in the type of shutdown that we had. And that's also resulted in a difference in the psychology of people in Michigan as they come back to work. All right, so their psychology has been affected by this. And you probably are noticing that there's an entire group of people who are resisting anything because they were shut down so hard for so long. And there's another group of people who are just sticking their noses out of their houses and are still extremely nervous about what's going on around them. All right, so the second half of last year was all about government stimulus, right? And that government stimulus is still affecting the economy today. Okay, so here you go. This is personal disposable income. Remember what I said? We had 15% fewer jobs in April. Look at what happened to disposable income. If we take this all the way back to the 1970s, you'll see this smooth line slowly going up. You never see a spike like this. This is the first round of stimulus. This is the continuing unemployment. We went back to the trend line at the very end of the year and they're like, uh-oh, people are hurting. We then had our $900 checks. And then we had the second round of checks. Disposable income spent the entire year above the trend. The entire year, even with all this massive unemployment, above the trend. All right. Understand, we have people go, oh, it just all went to Bill Gates. In December of this year, of 2020, we had reports from Bank of America that showed that the people in the bottom 25% of income had more money in the bank than they did in February. Okay, this is up and down the strata that saw this. You need to understand that. And as a result, they couldn't spend it fast enough. All right, this is savings. It's annualized, so this isn't $6 trillion in savings. Would be $6 trillion in savings if we saved that much all year long. Okay, here's the first bump. We were locked up, we couldn't spend it. Second bump, we spent pretty quickly. Third bump, we're spending pretty quickly. But look at this. We're still nearly 3 times elevated in savings across the United States, even today. This is money that people have for down payments. This is money that people have to spend on home improvements. This is money people have now to go out to eat. And we're starting to see them go through this. I would expect that we will see an additional $100 to $200 billion in spending across the United States over the course of the next 4 months as people unwind some of this savings. All right. And this isn't 2007. This is days late. This is being late on the mortgage. This is not foreclosure because we have foreclosure moratoriums. Those went near to zero in many ways. Look at this. This is not what we saw in 2007. People have money. All right. They have savings. They have money. Does that mean that we won't have foreclosures when things really start moving? No, we're going to have foreclosures because there's plenty of people who were on track to having a foreclosure even without COVID that got to buy. Okay. But we shouldn't expect to see that same pop that we saw last time. Okay. And here's one last measure to help you understand this is not a broken economy. Here is U6. It's a broader measure of unemployment. It includes people who are unemployed, but it also includes people who stopped working and aren't looking, but maybe they'll look again. And it includes people who are working part-time, but would like to work full-time, all that sort of stuff. Okay. You'll hear Janet Yellen talk about this a lot because she really likes that number. Okay. Here in 2007, we went above 11.7 on U6. By the way, 1999 U6 was above 8%. All right. So when the economy is running as hot as it can, 8% is about as low as you get on U6. It's different than your normal unemployment because it includes all these other people. So look at this. We crossed above it. It took us 72 months to drop below that number. This time, it took us 8 months. 8 months. And the number has continued to drop. All right. So here in Michigan, we have an issue because we're so manufacturing driven. That helped us as we came out of the recession, or as we came into last summer, because it was easy to bring manufacturing back because you can control who's in the areas, and you can control where they're standing to some extent, and you can do all those types of things. Services, not so much. So here we can see that manufacturing, by and large, is out of the hole. We've seen a massive increase in orders. Those order strength has continued through this year. All right. And that was after going through a shallow manufacturing recession at the end of last year, at the end of 2019. Sorry, we're in 2021 now. So used to talking about 2020. All right. So you can see here's the shutdown. We came back pretty quickly. And here in West Michigan, the order books have just continued to go up. What we're seeing, however, is that the firms are not adding extra capacity. And they're not adding extra capacity because they're worried that this surge is temporary because of that sugar rush of all that government money that's being dumped in. So we're not seeing them add a lot of extra capacity. Restaurants, however, are still in the hole. So you can see that we had 40% of local restaurants closed in April of last year in Michigan. We ran 18 to 20% over last summer when we were able to eat outside a bunch. And then as we went into the winter again this year and we had our second shutdown, 30% of local restaurants are closed. And data today tells us that about 22 to 25% of local restaurants. This doesn't include McDonald's and Applebee's, those big chains that have deep pockets. These are those local restaurants that create flair across your area. Okay, so we're looking at about 25% that are permanently closed. How do we know that? Because these restaurants were taking credit card transactions at the beginning of last March, and they're not taking credit card transactions now. So we know that they had economic activity that was visible, and now they don't. And they aren't coming back now. So we saw as the opening happened that those numbers started to go up. And many of you have probably started to see a backfill of new restaurants coming in as people try to take advantage of the fact that everybody wants to go out to eat because we didn't get to go out to eat for a year and we're sick of our home cooking or French fries that had to travel 20 minutes to our house. And so that's where we're heading right now. To help you see this even further, here in Kent County and Ottawa County, this was the second shutdown. So this is the difference between November and December. So the November number would have been taken just before we had the second shutdown where they closed in seat capacity, right? And we can see something. Leisure and hospitality jobs dropped by more than 7,000 in that month, all right? Manufacturing didn't change at all, right? No difference. So this is where we're sitting right now, all right? At the very beginning of the year, we had about a quarter of businesses tell me that they were going to shrink this year. And about 50% said they were going to grow really, really fast this year. And that's consistent with the group that said we're already back, or we're going to be back before the middle of this year, right? Here's a dirty little secret. Our GDP is already back. We're down a lot of employment, but our GDP, the amount that we're producing, is already back. All right. So construction. I just did construction here? No, we're doing housing and construction. So the big numbers here. So we have never in the history of the construction materials series ever seen a year-over-year increase like this, right? So this is 25% up. If I took out lumber, we would still be up close to a record amount. All right. And we're starting to see lumber come down now. And we're actually seeing that this inflation has increased the price of new home construction enough that we're seeing construction roll back. So we're actually seeing a reduction in the amount of construction happen. We're starting to see tick ups in construction workers who are now switching jobs or being laid off for short periods of time. We're starting to see pieces like that because that new construction can't happen under the prices that we have. And so we expect that wood prices will really start to reach back as we go through the next 2 months. We're already seeing signs that people are buying only what they need and being very careful about what's being purchased. And the sawmills are already starting to have to retrench. There's a whole nother set of construction materials that will not. Okay, if you think about copper, if you think about things like sheetrock and things like that, think about this. We're going to have more construction again. We've had breakneck construction recently across the United States. But think about anything that you need to build an electric car. Copper is one of those big ones. It's not going to come back because there's going to be a push to increase the amount of electric cars being produced. And as that push starts to happen, what we're already seeing is China's buying up copper and any materials you need. The United States is doing that. Companies are saying, hey, the supply chain is broken. We need to buy more than we would normally buy just to make sure we have what we need when we need it. That's going to keep that supply chain inflation up for a longer period of time. We'll talk about that in a second. So if we see this simple housing price index, this is a simple one, and it just shows that Detroit and the Grand Rapids area were basically over the last 10 years moving in the same direction. Grand Rapids a little bit faster. But I want to do this one here. We don't have stuff for the last 3 months because we can't do it that tight on a sale index like this. But what you can see here in the Grand Rapids area is that we see that everything continued to go up, all right? And even our worst type of areas, downtown Grand Rapids, continued to do well. But then as we got to the end of the year, the burbs started to pull away. All right, so we started to see the suburbs start to pull away price-wise. This was seen nationally. In fact, there was just a National Bureau of Economic Research paper put out that's calling it the donut effect. It's really not seen in cities the size of Grand Rapids. It's seen in cities size 20, in the top 20 metro areas. But what they started to see was people leaving the downtown and moving to that ring of burbs around the downtown, creating what they call the donut effect. Now, Detroit's always had the inverse donut. Downtown was doing well. The piece in between sort of sucked. And then you had that outer area that did well. But what they're seeing is that in the big metro areas, people are moving out. And as they discussed this and they went through and talked to people, what they found was people are thinking in their brain that we're moving to hybrid working environments, okay? Where I'm gonna have to go into work 1, 2, or 3 times a week. And I get to work from home 1, 2, or 3 times a week, right? What this means is what they're discovering right now is that means that the people who moved to Boise, Idaho and we all know Boise, Idaho has been hot as all heck, they're going to have a harder time because not most employers aren't going to choose to go perfectly online. So people who are within their employers saying, yeah, I want to get a little bit further away from downtown. I don't have to commute every day, so I can eat a slightly longer commute. And they're going to that first round of burbs, far enough away that they get a nicer amenity, but close enough that they can make it downtown a couple times a week. And so that's what we're seeing right now in those big metro areas. And I know that we were discussing that in another presentation I did as we thought about would South Haven be able to start grabbing into some of that hybrid from Chicago. And at least the preliminary data suggests that they're a little too far away. But maybe since they're expanding the train lines and doing a lot of stuff there, maybe it's close enough if it gets them in a reasonable amount of time. Okay. So what we've had in the Grand Rapids area and Holland area is faster family creation than housing unit creation. And so housing units include both single family and multifamily, the whole works. Okay. So here's our family generation. This little gray line down here is the single family. This yellow line is the single family plus the multi. Okay. So what we can see here is this gap, just as people said, oh, I don't want to be near people because I'm scared I'm going to get sick. And so this versus this is what made you all super busy for the last 12 months. And I'm assuming you've been super busy. So if you could find houses to sell, which was the next problem. Okay, so here, this gap then we start asking, you notice it's catching up just a little bit, and it can still have this gap because we overbuilt a little bit in the 10 years previous to that, sorry. So if we look at rental rates, what you can see as we come through here, it's a little, I probably shouldn't have put Detroit on here so that you get a bigger scale, but what you can see is those rental rates are moving faster here in the Grand Rapids area than they are here. That's right here where we started to have that multifamily start to kick off. So what started to happen is we started to have enough additional multifamily that it put a damper on that really fast rate of growth for rentals, right? And then here you can see Detroit is starting to pick up right now, which tells us Detroit's probably getting a little bit behind given what we're seeing move into the area. I don't know the Detroit market as well, but that's what it's suggesting right now. And here you can see that that realistically, Grand Rapids is just staying really steady. So at this point, what's happening is we're building at about the rate that we need to keep up. All right. There's no signs at this point that we're overbuilding yet. All right. Or underbuilding yet. So I've seen studies that say we need thousands of more rental properties, or we need, what this data suggests is we may be slightly underbuilt, not slightly overbuilt. Okay. So the other things that you're probably all worried about are interest rates and prices for the coming year. So the big thing that you're probably hearing is, are these price increases permanent or are they temporary? And if they're temporary, how long are they going to be? And if they're permanent, how big are they going to be? And here's the trick now, is those answers for prices are also necessary to know before you know what's going to happen to interest rates, okay? Because the Federal Reserve will get to choose, is this an increase in prices or is this an increase in interest rates? All right, so let's look at this really quick. So there are three things that we look at to think about how fast prices are changing. The first one is always wages, okay? The first one is always wages. So as we look at wages here, we can see that as the economy started to open up, hospitality and leisure wages in Michigan really started to pop. Okay, so this is compared to the same month in 2019. So we're just ignoring 2020 because, well, 2020 just doesn't anything like anything we can talk about. So what we can see now, by April, we had reached 9% above April of 2019, wage-wise in hospitality. Okay, this is really starting to push up wage pressure on the bottom half of the labor pool. So let's look at it a little bit. This is national data now, and this is looking at the same worker versus the same worker. So this isn't baby boomers are retiring and we're having young workers. This is looking at same worker versus same worker year over year. And what we can see now is that construction wage has been running at above 4% growth, hit 5% at the end of last year, just breakneck stuff, okay? Manufacturing continues to show drops. What's happening there? It's dropping because in reality, they aren't having problems with labor except at the production level. So all those people who are skilled and higher up the chain, those engineers, they're not having problems with that part of manufacturing. They're having problems finding somebody to come in and put tab A into slot B, all right? And that's in competition with the leisure and hospitality folks. So that's creating a lot of wage growth on the bottom. And as what we're seeing right now is that wages for the bottom group, that bottom 25%, are running 4% versus 3% for everybody else. So that bottom group is growing really, really fast. In fact, what I tell most people is that the 20s will be the age of labor. So if you're worried about things like wealth disparity and things like that, I telling you, this is the decade in which labor is going to get a higher share of income by the time we reach the end of it. And it doesn't matter who's president. It doesn't matter what's happening. We have less and less and less labor. Here in Michigan, that graduating high school class for the next 10 years is going to drop by a percentage point a year. Okay. At the same time, you have a bunch of people who are baby boomers leave, and many of them took COVID to say, okay, I'm done. I'm not going to work till I'm 70. I'm leaving at 68. And we see a lot of that on that top end, that age group. So what we're seeing here is that the competition isn't across the board for manufacturing, it's for those low-level jobs. And so when you see the signs, it's not, we need engineers. If you look at the postings, it's not that we need engineers. It's, we need entry-level workers. We need second shift. We need, and those are all now reaching the top half of the teens as far as starting wages go. So this issue of $15 minimum wage will very soon be moot because the actual wage will be above 15 bucks for most people. Okay. Part of this is people leaving the workforce. So the blue is men, the orange are women. And you can see women were affected more than men. In fact, this was the first women's recession that we've ever had, where women's unemployment went above men's unemployment. Shouldn't be a surprise. 75% of the workers in education and 75% of the workers in healthcare are women. And those are the places where we saw the largest layoffs at the beginning of this, okay? And then retail and other places where they're more exposed. It's stayed persistent. A lot of that has to do with the fact that school was remote, and it was more likely that the woman stayed home to take care of the child as opposed to the men, okay? I'm not making a sexist comment. I'm just saying the way it is, all right? And there's a lot of fear that this will be persistent, meaning that women who left the workforce will choose not to come back. But we've seen over the last few months is that women are coming back really, really fast as those jobs start to reopen. So we're less concerned about that. So labor, good. The second thing we worry about is the amount of money there is. The Federal Reserve, all of this extra stimulus money, the Federal Reserve is monetizing that, meaning the Federal Reserve is buying that debt and turning it into dollar bills. That hasn't turned into inflation yet because people hadn't started spending it, but they are now. So now we'll get to start to see some of that inflation start to happen. All right. So you can see this huge increase. Yeah, it looks small on the graph, but realize this is 17 trillion and this is 22 trillion. So that's a $5 trillion increase in the amount of money in the economy. Okay, trillion. So as we have that increase in the money, as we know, anybody who trades anything that's collectible, the more you have of something that's collectible, the less it's worth. So the more money you have, the less it's worth. That shows up in inflation. So that's the second place we're looking. The third place we're looking is inputs. And here you can see this orange line, which is the input price, is starting to go up really, really fast. And as it started to go up faster, we're starting to see consumer prices go up faster. There are going to be supply bottlenecks all year, and it's going to increase the cost of production. We've had Chipotle today, we've had Kellogg, we've had all sorts of groups telling us they're increasing their prices because their input prices are going up. So that's the third place we're looking. So all of those things become important, and all of those things now are tipping more and more and more towards we might have a permanent change in inflation to a higher base level. Okay, we don't know it yet. All right, and right now it's still almost a grab bag, but the risk is growing. And so the longer we see these things happen, the more likely it is that that becomes a permanent price change. Okay, now how does that affect interest rates? What we see is the risk of prices and interest rates rising. So this isn't, don't think of this as percentage points, please. It's risk. It's the highest risk we've had in a long, long time. In fact, a higher risk than we had in 1982, for those of you who remember 14% CDs and 13% mortgages. So what we can see here is this very high risk. And that high risk will translate into about 300, maybe 350 basis points that will increase either prices or interest rates. Okay, so what does that mean? So if last year inflation was about 1.5%, so a 100 basis point increase would make it 2.5%. A 200 point would make it 3.5. So what we're looking at is a good chunk of this going to prices because the Federal Reserve has said it's going to keep interest rates low. So we expect that the interest rate effect will affect the long run. It might be 50 basis points. It's conceivable if the Federal Reserve decides to tighten a little bit near the end of the year that it might pick up speed from that. But the rest of that's going to happen on the price side. So you should be looking for that price side change. And if that price stays persistent through the first quarter, then next summer is going to see higher mortgage rates in a material way. Okay. So what should you watch? Do not watch unemployment. Don't care about unemployment. Don't think about unemployment. Don't listen to a single person who's sitting on the television saying, oh, this is the worst thing, or oh, this is the best thing, or oh, don't do it. It's immaterial. It doesn't matter right now. We're counting people who are unemployed, who've never been counted as unemployed before. There is this thought process that all of these people who are unemployed are going to make it back. They're not. We have a lot of people who are old enough who've decided not to do it. Okay. Watch for any resurgence of COVID. Any resurgence of COVID will take everything off the board. Watch passenger miles and border closures. Right now, we're seeing summer leisure travel in excess of what was in 2019 on airplanes. The airplanes aren't flying as much because we still don't have business travel back, but leisure travel is back at a higher number than what we saw in 2019. Okay, border closures. This helps us understand that those supply constraints that are happening and will tell us about the prices, which will ultimately tell us about those interest rates for next summer. Okay. And do watch consumer consumption expenditures. This is something I never watch. Consumers know nothing, all right, except for what's happening right now. And so they're really lousy at predicting recessions. They're really lousy at predicting improvements. But right now they have money burning a hole in their pocket. If they decide to spend it all, then things heat up really, really fast. All right. And those prices will get even a little higher as we go through the year. If they decide not to, then those prices will come a little lower as we get to the end of this year. Why does that matter? Higher prices by the end of this year leads to higher interest rates next summer. Okay. And so you should be looking forward with that. So here's my final. The US and Michigan economies have already reached their pre-pandemic levels. They're already there for GDP. It's going to take another 12 to 18 months for employment to get there, but our output is already there. All right. So I did 40 minutes. Hopefully that's not too long, Bernie, and I'm available for questions if that's something you want to do, Bernie.
Yes, Dr. Isely, we appreciate it. There's a lot of great information in there. Thank you for that. I think I just looking at some of the charts. I mean, it sounds to me like you're pretty bullish on I guess the fundamentals of the economy, right? And so when our clients, when our clients are coming to us saying, I believe there's a bubble, a housing bubble, like it just, I didn't see anything that kind of warrants that at all. Is that?
No, we're not seeing a bubble, at least not in the Southwest Michigan area, because there's enough millennials running around. There's enough Generation Z people running around. And despite the early concept that they were all going to want to live above a brew pub their entire life, I've been laughing at that for 10 years. Do people not remember what they were when they were a kid? The boomers wanted to live in a walk-up apartment in the 60s. The Generation X in the 80s and 90s wanted to live above the coffee shop. They even had a show about it. It was called Friends. What happened in the last season? They all got married and moved to the burbs. So we're just seeing Generation Z and and the millennials do it a little later. And so I don't see it. There's nothing there right now that says there is. Up north, we might start to see some retrenchment around second houses. So as people are now starting to get in their mind what's going to happen to prices, as we start looking at those tax increases that we expect for more wealthy people, that will happen sometime this year. You don't have to be an economist to predict that. And the comment and the thought process that now they're not going to be able to work all week from up north. They're now going to have to be close enough to Chicago, close enough to Detroit, in order to go back to work a few times a week. So that group of things suggests that we might see some cooling up in the north, but they're so hot. I don't know if cooling means that you're now just hot instead of super hot.
Well, I think that was really the next question. Is we saw, especially in some of our resort towns, we saw an influx of second home buyers, who, interesting, like when you talk to them, it's like, well, what do you typically do? Well, typically I might travel, I might go to Italy for 2 weeks, or I might do, so they're higher net worth individuals that, because of the coronavirus, are looking for a safe kind of place to be with their family, and they were limited on travel. And it's just, I think one of the questions that we have is, what does that look like? Does that having a second home in Southwest Michigan, does that wear out after a few years, or is it too early to tell?
I think it's a little too early to tell. I can tell you, I've read 3 academic papers that have been looking at the second home phenomena as we've gone through COVID, and all of them have shown it weakening more recently. So I'm not sure if that's what you're all seeing on the ground, but that's what they're seeing nationally for the second home. And particularly as we start to see some of these capital gains numbers that they're talking about, for that second home, it could really start to change the tax rate for someone. So you really need to be paying attention to how this tax increase goes through and how it's going to affect people's taxes for that second house. Because it very well could say, hey, we need to unload it more quickly. So it's something that we're a little worried about, but I'm not that worried about.
Okay. Well, I think the interesting, sometimes you wonder, do we feel like it's a bubble and the prices are going up because of kind of how we got here, because obviously when we went through the crash back in 8, 9, 10, 11, and then it kind of have come out, and now we're really, so sometimes I wonder, is it just perception? Just, hey, I remember when that house was selling for $30,000 and now it's 200. Well, maybe it shouldn't have been 30,000.
Well, what we saw is if you want to know the long-term run increase of a housing unit, you do the increase in family as a percentage, the inflation as a percentage, and make some adjustments for the age grade. So inflation's been running about 2% a year. Family house growth, or family creation in Southwest Michigan has been growing by 2 or 3%. So that says 5-6% a year is not an uncommon number. If you take that from 2000 and you wrap it through to now, you're barely overvalued.
Okay.
So that long run trend still is pretty consistent. The reason prices are high now is because we have too many people wanting to buy in, not enough people able to sell, and lack of ability to produce product below $350,000. So that's just fuel on a fire for houses in that 250 to 350 range. I doubt any of you have those stick around for more than a day or two, but maybe you have a.
Yeah. Well, and I think as you see the rents kind of slowly increasing, and that, right, it's that's the competition in that 250 to 300 range, and at some point it's like, well, I think I should own, right? Because money's still available to buy.
Mm-hmm.
Are you tracking? I don't think we touched on it, but like fiber or high speed internet at all? Is that something that comes on like it's probably on a, maybe not a macro scale, but just trying to because some of these different areas, are kind of becoming little Zoom towns almost, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
We've heard it referred to. Are you tracking any of that, or is that something we should be watching with our municipalities?
You should be watching it. And the number I tell people to watch is not download speed, it's upload speed. Okay. So my house has 300 megabit internet speed, right? Or gigabyte, or whatever they call it, 300. All right. But my upload speed is 10, right? Upload never mattered, ever. It just didn't matter. The download speed mattered because at 300, I could download a Netflix movie in a minute or two and we're good to go.
Right.
Upload didn't matter. But what we're doing right now, every single one of you is consuming 5 megabytes of upload speed. You have somebody else in the house, you're at 10 megabytes. And if your phone decides to do a download at the same time, you get kicked off the internet. So we have to be looking at that upload speed. We have to be looking at access to 5G, and we have to be looking at stability. So you should be watching those outage reports. You should be watching, those places where we have good, stable internet with reasonable upload speeds are places that are going to be havens for people who are telecommuting, and it will open those areas up.
So the other question I had was, during I would say the downturn of 08 through 11, 12, or wherever you want to kind of pin that, we had a lot of investors coming to Michigan from other states, right? California, especially. And we would talk to them and say, why Michigan? And they said, well, because you're stable. You're not quite as, you don't have the up and downs that California has. Are you seeing other states that are having are they having I guess less stable than Michigan, or is Michigan competing, or is it just consistent with the other states?
Well, I think the problem for Michigan is going to be moving in, moving out. So one of the things I wanted to do for you guys, and I didn't quite get there, was do net migration numbers through the first 4 months of this year, because I now have access to that data, and I didn't quite get there. But we're still seeing in most of Michigan very little new population growth outside of the Grand Rapids MSA. And that's going to matter in the end for housing. If your population, the reason why the housing market crashed in Detroit is you went from 750,000 people to 500,000 people. You can't support all the housing and all the infrastructure that's there. And so we really have to watch that family creation. And news isn't so great for most of Michigan. It is here in the Grand Rapids MSA, and to a lesser extent down into the Kalamazoo area.
So is it fair to say that Southwest Michigan, and I know there's people on the call from Northern Michigan too, but Ottawa County, Allegan County, Kent County, we need to be careful that we're not just looking at Michigan statistics, that we're actually looking at West Michigan statistics.
Yes. One that's really interesting is that if you look at people between the ages of 27 and 37 versus over the age of 67, Kent County has, if you just added up the population between that, the 27 to 37 and the population over 67, in Kent County, 55% of those people would be in the younger age group. Okay. That doesn't exist in the vast majority of Michigan. It doesn't even exist in Ottawa County. Ottawa County is almost the exact reverse. 55% would be in the old group. It's that young group that's creating that dynamic energy. It's that young group that's causing people to say, I want to move to the area. And then they spill out into the counties around and really prop up places like Georgetown Township. And so what we're seeing right now is that we also have some midterm risk as we move towards electrification of the automobile industry. Because along the lakeshore, we make a lot of transmissions, we make a lot of pistons, we make a lot of those types of materials. Okay. Well, an electric car doesn't need a transmission and it doesn't need pistons. Is that a risk in the 5-year horizon? No, but it is a risk in the 10, 15-year horizons.
Okay. It's good to know. Is there any other questions anybody else has? If you want to put them in the chat box, if that's easier. Just want to make sure that we. Just a second here. Well, Dr. Isely, we appreciate your time and energy you put into this, and thank you for keeping us informed. And obviously, we love a lot of things about your report, so that's always good too, right?
I like to be value added, so hopefully I'm giving.
So we did just have a question that somebody, Brian Klingel asked, or Klinger asked, do you see home prices as being cheap, actually? Undervalued.
An economist would say if you have 9 bidders on a house, the price is too low. Now, an assessor would not necessarily say that. But what we know right now is that there's enough money available, there's enough savings available, there's enough income available that bottom end of the market is probably still a little underpriced and is likely going to go up. And I'm not talking distressed houses, but I'm talking, that 200, 350 range. Above that, I can't tell you whether it's overpriced or underpriced. It's going to depend a lot on the geography that you're in.
Sure.
Because it's just going to matter on that.
Sure.
But that lower price end right now, we're going to probably continue to see those pushing up as hard as they can against what the assessed values will allow.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and we hope that hopefully we can do this again.
All right, I enjoy it. So it's great. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.